Before we get into tonight's stories, I just want to take a few seconds to say thank you for being here. Unlike many horror channels, all the stories you hear on this channel are completely original, written by me. Nothing comes from Reddit, Google, or any third-party source, so every story is something new that you won't hear anywhere else. Keeping up with the writing is a lot of work, but seeing this community grow makes it completely worth it. So if you enjoy the stories and you're a fan of horror, please consider subscribing and joining us. It really helps the channel grow, and it would mean a lot to me. Now let's get into the stories. I was a prison guard for 30 years, across 3 prisons, and I watched everything change. The walls changed first, then the uniforms, then the language, then the men. When I started, a prison was a prison. Metal bars, concrete floors, keys heavy enough to bruise your thigh, and guards who looked like they'd been carved out of old tobacco and bad weather. By the time I retired, everything had cameras, touchscreens, policies, wellness posters, and committees for committees. The inmates changed too. Not better or worse, not exactly. Just different. The old-timers had rules. Ugly rules, but rules. Later came gangs with paperwork, kids with dead eyes, men who knew every loophole in the system, and men who couldn't read but knew how to make a weapon out of anything smaller than a spoon. People outside changed most of all. One decade, they wanted us tougher. The next, they wanted us kinder. Then tougher again. Everyone had an opinion on prisons. Very few had ever smelled one at 3 in the morning. As for guards, we changed because we had to. The old breed could be cruel. No denying that. Some were cowards with badges. Some were good men doing an impossible job. Most were somewhere in between. I have hundreds of stories. Riots, suicides, escapes, murders. Things I still see when I close my eyes. But there is one I have never told properly. It happened at my first prison. Harrogate Correctional was small, old, and mean. It sat on a wet patch of land outside a dying mill town, surrounded by razor wire and pine trees. The place had been built before anyone cared about rehabilitation. It was just a box for men you didn't want in the world. The cells had bars, not doors. The windows were narrow slits. In winter, frost formed inside the glass. In summer, the whole place smelled of bleach, sweat, rust, and boiled cabbage. The senior guards carried shotguns on yard duty, not locked away, not hidden, over their arms like farmers watching crows. I was 22 when I started there, too young to know fear properly. I thought fear meant jumping at noise or backing away from a big inmate. I learned later that real fear is quieter. It gets into routine, into footsteps, into keys turning in locks. Harrogate had a solitary wing at the back of C Block. 3 cells. That was all. Cell 1 was for fights. Cell 2 was for contraband, threats, refusal to work. Cell 3 was different. Nobody explained it to me at first. They just said, "Don't open 3 unless Reynolds tells you." Reynolds was the head guard. He had been at Harrogate since before I was born. His face looked permanently clenched, like he was biting down on a nail. Prisoners who acted up went into cell 1 or 2. Prisoners who truly crossed a line went into cell 3. Sometimes they had done something bad. Sometimes they had only annoyed the wrong senior guard. That was how it worked then. Don't let anyone tell you different. Cell 3 was the oldest part of the prison. That's what Reynolds told me one night, after I asked why the wall around it looked different. The bricks were darker there, almost black, and the mortar had gone soft in places. The bars were thicker than the others. Hand-forged, one of the old guards said. There was a rumor about it, of course. Prisons are built on rumors. They said decades earlier, an innocent man had been locked in cell 3 and forgotten. Not officially. Not on paper. He had been put there after attacking a guard, or after being accused of it. Then paperwork went missing. Staff changed. Nobody came for him. By the time they remembered, he had starved. That was the story. I didn't believe it. Not then. What I did believe was what Cell 3 did to men. I saw prisoners go in hard and come out hollow. 24 hours was enough. They would step out blinking, like they had not seen light in months. Some couldn't talk. Some whispered to themselves. One man, a lifer named Bell, came out laughing so hard he split his lip on his own teeth. Another dropped to his knees and begged Reynolds not to leave him alone ever again. The strange part was what the talkers said. They didn't say they'd seen a ghost, not most of them. They said they had been in there for years. I was hungry so long, one told me, gripping my sleeve with both hands. You don't know how long hungry can get. He had missed one dinner. Another said he had scratched days into the wall. But when we checked, there were no marks. At the mention of going back, they changed. Every one of them. Some fought like animals. Some screamed until they vomited. One big man, 240 pounds at least, wet himself when Reynolds simply pointed down the solitary corridor. The guards joked about it, called it 3 doing the work. Said some men only understood old medicine. I laughed along once or twice. I was young. I wanted to belong. Then came Martin Dale. Dale was quiet. Too quiet for prison, which can be dangerous. He had been convicted of killing a shopkeeper during a robbery. He said he hadn't done it. They all said that, so nobody listened. He kept his head down, worked laundry, never fought, never mouthed off. The vice head guard, Mercer, hated him. Mercer was one of those men who thought decency in a prisoner was an insult. He liked noise, discipline, visible fear. Dale gave him nothing. No begging, no anger, no entertainment. One afternoon, a blade was found under Dale's mattress. Dale said it wasn't his. Mercer smiled. Cell 3, he said. I was on the escort. I remember Dale walking between us, pale but calm. He looked at the cell doors as we passed Cell 1, then Cell 2. When we stopped at 3, he finally spoke. I didn't do anything. Mercer leaned close. That's what makes it funny. We put him in. The door shut with a sound I still hear sometimes. Not a clang. A deep iron cough. Dale stood in the middle of the cell, looking at us through the bars. Reynolds was not there. If he had been, maybe it would have gone differently. Maybe not. I checked on Dale at midnight. He was sitting on the bunk, knees drawn up, staring at the corner. Nothing unusual. At 6 in the morning, I brought breakfast. Usually, men in 3 didn't touch food. They'd be crying, mumbling, or pressed against the bars, begging to come out. Dale was asleep. I thought he was dead at first, and my stomach turned over. Then he opened his eyes. He looked rested, not happy, not confused, just tired, the way anyone would be after a bad night on a prison bunk. You all right? I asked. He sat up. Yes. I waited for more. Nothing came. At the 24-hour mark, Mercer came with me to collect him. He looked disappointed before we even opened the door. Dale walked out steady. No shaking, no tears, no madness. Mercer grabbed his arm hard enough to make him wince. What happened in there? Dale looked at him, then at me. Nothing much. Mercer shoved him down the corridor. Later, after Dale was back in general population, I found a reason to pass by laundry. He was folding sheets. I asked him quietly, "What happened?" He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "About half an hour after you shut the door, a man appeared in the corner." My mouth went dry. "What man?" "Old clothes. Not prison clothes. Older. He was thin." Dale paused. "No, more than thin. Starved." I said nothing. "He was missing an eye," Dale continued. "This one." He touched the left side of his face. Socket all sunk in. Skin like paper. I thought he was going to kill me. "What did he do?" He came close, bent down, put his hand on my chest. Dale looked at his own shirt, as though the touch might still be there. Then he jumped back, like he'd burned himself. He looked confused, angry, almost. Then sad. I remember the laundry machines thumping behind us, the smell of detergent. Dale's hands gripping a white sheet. He pointed at me, Dale whispered, and he said one word. I already knew it before he said it. "Innocent." Dale looked up at me. Then he vanished. I told myself he was lying. Inmates lie. Men lie when afraid. Men lie to make sense of things. But Dale had no reason to lie like that. 6 months later, a man named Patrick Hume confessed to the shopkeeper murder while dying of cancer in another state. Details matched. Evidence was rechecked. Witness statements fell apart. Martin Dale was released. I saw him on the news walking out in a brown suit that didn't fit him. He looked older than he should have, but free. Harrogate closed in 1998. They tore it down 2 years later. Good riddance, most said. Houses went up on the land. Neat little brick homes with white doors and flower beds. Children's bikes on driveways. Barbecue smoke in summer. I drove by once after retiring. I parked across the street and tried to work out where C Block had been, where the solitary wing had stood, where Cell 3 had waited in the dark. There was a house there now, blue curtains, a porch light, a woman inside washing dishes. I sat in my car longer than I should have. I have spent years wondering what lived in Cell 3. Was it a ghost, a curse? The memory of an innocent man so hungry and forgotten that time itself rotted around him? I don't know, but I know this. Something in that cell judged men. Not by our files, not by our uniforms, not by verdicts, reports, or the lies we told ourselves. It judged something deeper. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that house. I think about some child waking in the dark, hearing a dry footstep in the corner. I think about a shape unfolding itself from the wall, thin, one-eyed, starving. I wonder if it knows the prison is gone. I wonder if it cares. Modern consensus is that society and community spirit isn't what it used to be. I'm sure you've all heard it before. An elderly relative at Christmas, maybe, leaning back in their chair after 2 glasses of sherry, shaking their head at the state of the world. "There's no community anymore," they'll say. "People don't know their neighbors. Back in my day, everyone on the street looked out for each other." And you nod, don't you? Because it sounds right. It sounds warm. It sounds like a lost world of unlocked doors, borrowed sugar, kids playing outside until the lamps came on, and someone always knowing if Mrs. Davies at number 12 hadn't opened her curtains by 9. But I've always found it funny, ironic really, that whenever a street does have a nightmare neighbor, the sort of person who kills that community's spirit stone dead, it's usually one of those same old people complaining that things aren't how they used to be. On my street, that person was Mr. Gregson. Now, Mr. Gregson was a retired high school English teacher, well into his 70s, and he carried himself with the permanent disappointment of a man who had spent 40 years correcting other people's grammar and somehow never managed to stop. He lived at number 28 in a narrow brick house with a front lawn cut so precisely it looked less maintained than threatened. He was cranky, bitter, and suspicious of absolutely everyone. If you parked outside his house, even legally, he'd come out and tap on your window. If your bin was 2 inches too close to his driveway, he'd leave a handwritten note. If children played football in the street, he'd stand at his gate with his arms folded, watching like a prison guard at exercise hour. And God help any ball that crossed the sacred border of his property. He didn't throw them back. He confiscated them. Footballs, tennis balls, plastic cricket balls, even one of those cheap inflatable beach balls a toddler had kicked too far during a barbecue. All of them vanished into Mr. Gregson's house, never to be seen again. Parents complained at first, then they gave up. Children learned to keep clear of number 28. Dogs seemed to know too. Even they didn't bark at his gate. But the worst part was the window. Mr. Gregson had this front room with net curtains, yellowed slightly by age, and behind them sat his chair. Every day, from morning until evening, he'd be there. A thin, crooked shape in a brown cardigan, sitting in the gloom with a notebook on his lap. He made notes. We knew because he told us. He recorded how many cars parked on the street, which houses had visitors, who put their bins out early, who brought them in late, how many times kids kicked balls against walls, how often delivery vans stopped. Once, he accused my neighbor Priya of running a commercial enterprise from a residential property because she'd received 3 parcels in one afternoon. They were birthday presents for her daughter. That was Mr. Gregson all over. Honestly, sometimes it felt like his entire retirement revolved around making everyone else miserable. So when people passed number 28 and saw his shadowy figure sitting behind the net curtain, staring out at the street, no one thought much of it. That was just Gregson, watching, judging, recording evidence for some imaginary court where he was both prosecutor and king. Then came the summer holidays. It was one of those hot afternoons where the tarmac smells soft and the whole street seems half asleep. Kids were out playing, bikes were dumped on pavements, someone had music on in a garden, and a group of teenagers were kicking a ball around near the end of the road. One of them was Leo. Leo was 14, skinny, loud, and built entirely out of confidence he hadn't earned yet. Every street has one. A boy who thinks fear is something adults invented to keep life boring. The ball came flying off someone's foot, clipped the curb, bounced over Mr. Gregson's little iron fence, and rolled to a stop in the middle of his front lawn. The game froze. Everyone looked at number 28. Behind the net curtain, Mr. Gregson was sitting in his usual chair, still, watching. One of the younger kids muttered, "Leave it." Another said, "My dad'll buy another." But Leo, of course, laughed. "Nah," he said. "I'm getting it." Someone told him not to be stupid. That made it certain. He climbed the low fence with ridiculous swagger, landed on Gregson's perfect grass, and strutted across the lawn as if claiming conquered territory. He bent down, picked up the ball, tucked it under one arm, and turned toward the window. We were all watching now, from gardens, doorsteps, upstairs windows. Leo grinned. Then he raised his hand and gave Mr. Gregson a big, theatrical middle finger. A few of the kids burst out laughing, and then Mr. Gregson's head fell off. Not metaphorically, not slumped. Fell. His chin dipped first, like he was nodding in slow agreement. Then his whole head slid sideways off his neck, dropped onto his shoulder, rolled down his chest, and hit the inside windowsill with a dull, wet thud. The laughter stopped so sharply it felt like someone had cut a wire. Leo didn't move. For half a second, I don't think any of us understood what we'd seen. The body remained sitting upright in the chair. The net curtain blurred the details, but the shape was unmistakable. Shoulders, cardigan, empty space where a head should have been. Then Leo screamed. Not shouted, screamed. This awful, high, torn sound that didn't belong to a cocky 14-year-old boy at all. He dropped the ball and scrambled backward, tripping over himself on the lawn. He hit the fence, went over it badly, landed on the pavement, and kept crawling until two of the older lads grabbed him. By then, doors were opening all down the street. Someone called the police. Someone else called an ambulance, though I think we all knew that was optimism more than practicality. When the officers arrived, they had to force the door. I remember standing with half the street behind the cordon, all of us quiet in a way we'd never been quiet before. No gossip, no jokes, no theories, just the occasional low murmur and the sound of radios crackling. Later, we found out Mr. Gregson had been dead for nearly 4 weeks. 4 weeks. Sitting there in his chair, behind his net curtains, looking out over the street he'd spent years policing. The summer heat had done what summer heat does. The room had been closed up, curtains drawn, windows shut. No one had noticed the smell at first because, well, Gregson's house had always had a musty old smell around it. And no one had knocked because no one wanted to speak to him. His shopping hadn't been missed. He had no close family visiting. Bills were paid automatically. Milk wasn't delivered. Newspapers had stopped years before. And the figure in the window? That was enough for everyone. We saw him there and thought, there's Gregson, being Gregson. The police said decomposition had weakened the tissue in his neck. When Leo's gesture, or maybe just coincidence, caused us all to focus on him. At exactly the wrong moment, gravity finished what time it started. Poor Leo was never quite the same after that. People joked at first, because people are cruel when they're uncomfortable. They called him Headshot for about 2 days, until his mom came out and screamed at a group of lads so fiercely they never said it again. He stopped playing football in the street, stopped walking past number 28. For months, if a curtain shifted in a front window, he'd flinch. And the rest of us? Well, we changed too. Not dramatically. Not like some sentimental film where everyone suddenly becomes best friends and starts holding street parties under bunting. But small things changed. People began checking in. A knock here, a text there. Haven't seen you today, all right? Need anything from the shop? Your bin's still out. Want me to bring it in? We learned the names of people we'd lived beside for years. When old Mrs. Halpern at number 11 didn't open her curtains one morning, 3 neighbors noticed before lunchtime. Turned out she'd only gone to visit her sister, but still, we noticed. As for number 28, a young couple bought it eventually. They ripped out the carpets, painted the door blue, dug up half the lawn, and planted lavender, where Gregson used to glare at children. Kids play there now. Their balls still go over the fence sometimes. The couple always throw them back. So yes, maybe community isn't what it used to be. Maybe people are busier, lonelier, more suspicious. Maybe we don't borrow sugar anymore because everyone's got phones and supermarkets, open until midnight. But I'll tell you what I learned from Mr. Gregson. Looking out at a street isn't the same as being part of it. Knowing everyone's business isn't the same as caring. And sometimes the person everyone avoids is the person most in need of a knock at the door. Even if they're miserable, even if they've stolen 6 footballs, even if, God help you, they used to be an English teacher.
Okay. Hey, Bob, I'm looking at what Jack was talking about, and it's definitely not a particle that's nearby, because there is another one I can look at and get a three-dimensional comparison with. It is a bright object, and it's obviously rotating because it's flashing. It's way out in the distance, as I say, because there are particles that are close by, and it's obviously not one of those. It's apparently rotating in a very rhythmic fashion because the flashes come around almost on time. And it's, as we look back at the Earth, it's up at about 11 o'clock, about, maybe 10 or 12 Earth diameters. I don't know whether that does you any good, but there's something out there.
Right, we don't doubt it, Gene, and we might work up a set of...
The audio recording you just heard was the voice of Gene Cernan, astronaut, American hero, last man on the moon, and my personal idol, the reason I wanted to become an astronaut. Experts say that clip is Gene reporting a rocket pod floating away during the Apollo 17 mission. But experts can lie. I learned that before I ever got close to space. I joined the Air Force in the late 90s with one goal in mind. Not glory, not medals, not even jets, really. NASA. I wanted the patch. I wanted the suit. I wanted to look down at the Earth the way Cernan had, and know, for one impossible moment, that I had stepped outside the world everybody else was trapped inside. I made it through pilot training. I flew everything they would let me touch. In the early 2000s, I was flying Top Gun missions, pushing aircraft so hard the seams groaned and the sky turned black at the edges of my vision. I was good. Not the best, but good enough to keep moving upward. Then NASA opened applications for the astronaut program. I applied, and God help me, I got in. They call you an ASCAN at first, astronaut candidate. It sounds almost cute, like summer camp with pressure suits, but it is not cute. It is the most expensive, elaborate way mankind has ever invented to find out what you are really afraid of. The swimming drills were brutal. The survival exercises were worse. The classroom hours were endless. Russian language in the morning, orbital mechanics after lunch, robotics until your eyes crossed. Then came the centrifuge, where they spun us until the blood tried to leave our heads and hide in our boots. But it was all doable. Hard, yes. Humbling, absolutely. But doable. Then came the flights. You know the ones. A high-performance jet takes you up toward the very edge of the Earth, high enough that the blue drains out of the sky and the curve of the planet becomes visible beneath you. Then the aircraft dives, and for a few seconds gravity lets go. The old nickname is the Vomit Comet. Though we weren't in the lumbering tourist version, ours was sleeker, meaner, built for men and women who were supposed to keep their breakfast and their dignity. I remember the day clearly because I had been annoyed by how beautiful it was. The sky was spotless. The earth below looked painted. We were strapped in, shoulder to shoulder, trying to look calm while our stomachs prepared to betray us. The pilot was an Air Force major named Harlan. Senior trainer was a woman named Dr. Meade, former Navy, sharp as broken glass. At altitude, Harlan's voice came over the comms. "Dr. Meade, I have a visual." Meade leaned forward. "Say again?" "Off starboard. High, maybe half a mile out." At first, none of us understood the tone in his voice. Pilots report things: weather, traffic, debris. They do not sound afraid. We all turned as much as our restraints allowed. And there it was, hanging above the world, just beyond us, was a large black object orbiting the Earth. I say object because I do not have another word. It was not a satellite. It was too close, too still, too deliberate. It had sharp edges, wrong angles, surfaces like black glass and chrome. No markings, no solar panels, no flame. No movement except a slow, patient rotation. It looked ancient. That was my first thought, and I have hated myself for it ever since. Not advanced, not alien, ancient. Dr. Meade went white. Not pale, white. She grabbed the comm. "Command, this is Training Flight 7. We have visual contact with..." She stopped. The object had begun to vibrate. I could not hear it through the aircraft. Not exactly, but I felt it in my teeth. The edges blurred. The black surfaces flexed like something breathing beneath metal skin. Then a green pulse shot out of it. Not a beam, a pulse. It expanded through the sky in a perfect ring and engulfed the jet. The aircraft slammed sideways, like it had hit an invisible ocean. Every alarm screamed at once. My harness cut into my shoulders. Someone vomited. Someone prayed. The windows flooded green so brightly that I could see the veins inside my eyelids when I shut my eyes. For 3 seconds, there was no gravity, no sound, no self. I saw things in that green light. Not images, exactly. Impressions. Tall figures without faces, standing in a place that was not a room, watching us from behind the dark. A sound like fingernails dragging across radio static. A feeling of being noticed by something that had not known we were there before. Then the light vanished. Harlan got us down. I still do not know how. When we landed, NASA leadership was waiting on the tarmac. Not medics, not engineers. Leadership. They took us straight to debriefing. No showers, no phone calls, no jokes about who had puked. We were separated, interviewed, re-interviewed, then put together in a windowless room with 2 men I had never seen before. They wore suits, not uniforms. The papers came next. Secrecy agreements, national security language, prison time, loss of clearance, loss of pension, loss of everything. Then Dr. Meade, who had seen what we saw, stood at the front of the room and told us we had experienced a classified equipment malfunction involving an experimental defense platform. No one believed her. No one argued. The next morning, we were informed that we could no longer participate in the astronaut program. Medical reasons. That was the phrase. Medical reasons. They sent me home with a handshake, a packet of documents, and the dead-eyed sympathy of people who knew exactly what they were doing. About a week later, the nightmares started. At first, they were ordinary enough. Falling, suffocating, being trapped in a cockpit while the sky turned green. Then they changed. I began dreaming of faceless beings standing at the foot of my bed. Long bodies, smooth heads, no mouths, no eyes, yet I knew they were looking at me. Sometimes there were 3, sometimes 7. Once there were so many that my bedroom seemed full of them. shoulder to shoulder, silent as mourners. I woke with nosebleeds. My wife left after 6 months. I do not blame her. I had become a man who unplugged televisions before sleeping, a man who tore radios out of cars, a man who could not sit near a baby monitor, because beneath the soft hiss of static, I could hear whispering. Not words, almost words. The worst part is that sometimes I understood them anyway. A name, coordinates, a sound like my mother crying, though she had been dead for 10 years. Once, very clearly, Gene Cernan's voice saying, "They were already here." I tried to contact the others. Most would not speak to me. One told me, "Forget the flight," and hung up. Another said, "They know when we talk," then changed his number. Harlan died in a private plane crash in 2009. Clear weather. No distress call. Dr. Mead disappeared from public records. I do not mean she retired. I mean she vanished. Degrees, articles, conference talks, scrubbed down to ghosts. One of the candidates, a kid named Alvarez, ended up in a psychiatric hospital with schizophrenic symptoms. That is what I heard anyway. Schizophrenic symptoms. He was not schizophrenic. He was 29 years old, sharp, funny, engaged to a woman in Denver, and he could calculate re-entry angles in his head after 2 beers. He was not sick until the green light touched him. None of us were. I am 48 now. My hair is going gray. My hands shake when the television is on in another room. Sometimes my phone lights up with no incoming call, and from the speaker comes that same thin static, like something dragging itself across a frequency too old for human machines. Last night I heard applause through the kitchen radio. There was no radio in the kitchen. Then Gene Cernan's voice, buried under lunar hiss and distance, said my name. So I am recording this because I do not know how much longer I will sound like myself. Something is out there in space. I do not know what it is. I do not know if it is alive in any way we understand. I do not know if it is friendly, hostile, curious, sleeping, or waiting. Maybe Gene Cernan saw it too. Maybe others did. Maybe the reports are all filed away under equipment failures, floating rocket pods, sensor errors, pilot fatigue, medical reasons. But I know what I saw, and for whatever reason, NASA does not want anyone to know. They do not want anyone asking questions, especially not this one. When we looked out into space, what looked back?
I rug pulled my own crypto project in my early 20s, made more money than my parents have ever had, and I'm not sure if I'm a villain or just good at capitalism.
Throwaway for obvious reasons. I'm in my early 20s. A year ago, I was broke. Not can't buy Starbucks broke. I mean checking my bank app before buying groceries broke. Now I have more money sitting in a hardware wallet than my parents made combined in a decade. And I got it by creating a crypto token, hyping it, and rug pulling it. I need to say this up front. Technically, I didn't break the law. I didn't hack anyone. I didn't steal passwords. I didn't break into accounts. I created a token. People voluntarily bought it. And I sold my allocation when liquidity was high. The smart contract didn't promise anything enforceable. There was no signed agreement. It was just a token. And yet, people lost everything. Let me explain how it happened. I've been deep in crypto Twitter and Discord since I was 18. I watched meme coins explode. I watched total nonsense projects hit 8-figure market caps because of a good logo and a funny name. I saw influencers shill garbage and pretend it was community-driven. The more I watched, the more I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't about technology. It wasn't about decentralization. It was about attention. If you could generate hype, you could generate liquidity. So I did. I designed a coin around a stupid but catchy concept, something memeable. I paid a guy on Fiverr to make a clean logo. I wrote a white paper that sounded impressive but said basically nothing. Buzzwords. Community governance. Long-term roadmap. Ecosystem expansion. There was no ecosystem. It was just a token on a popular chain. I seeded initial liquidity with about $8,000 I had saved from freelance coding. I made a Telegram group. I created a Twitter account. I DM'd small crypto influencers and offered them a percentage of tokens to tweet about it. Within 48 hours of launch, it started moving. Watching that chart was surreal. Every green candle felt like validation. People were posting rocket emojis. We're early. Next 100 times. Diamond hands. I was the dev. Anonymous, of course. I played the role perfectly. I talked about long-term vision. I hinted at major partnerships. I said things like, we're in talks and big announcements coming. There were no talks, no partnerships, but in crypto, hope is fuel. Within 2 weeks, the market cap had crossed 7 figures. My initial $8,000 liquidity was now dwarfed by hundreds of thousands from buyers. I had allocated myself a large percentage of tokens at launch. That's standard. Everyone does it, and I knew what that meant. If I sold carefully, I could walk away with life-changing money. The first time I clicked swap, my heart was pounding. I told myself I was just taking some profit. Founders deserve compensation, right? The price dipped slightly. People in the chat said, healthy correction. I almost laughed. I kept selling in chunks, not enough to crash it instantly, just enough to extract liquidity steadily. Eventually, the floor gave out. The chart went vertical, in the wrong direction. Panic in the Telegram. Dev, what's happening? Is this a whale? Why is liquidity dropping? I typed something vague about market volatility. Then I pulled the rest. Liquidity drained. Price nuked. Within minutes, it was effectively worthless. I deleted the Telegram, locked the Twitter, disappeared. In total, after fees and everything, I walked away with just under $1.4 million. I remember sitting in my apartment staring at the number. It didn't feel real. I refreshed the wallet over and over. I transferred some to stablecoins. I moved some to a cold wallet. I expected to feel like a criminal. Instead, I felt powerful. That's the part that scares me. Over the next few days, I lurked anonymously in forums. I saw people posting screenshots. I put in $12,000, it's gone. This was my savings. How could the dev do this? One guy said he convinced his brother to invest, and now couldn't look him in the eye. I read those comments while sitting in a brand new apartment I paid for in cash, and I didn't feel shame the way I thought I would. I felt uncomfortable, a tightness in my chest, but not enough to undo it. Not enough to send the money back. Not enough to publicly admit it. I told myself the same things everyone else says. No one forced them to buy. It's crypto. Everyone knows the risks. High risk, high reward. They were greedy too. And here's the thing that keeps echoing in my head. Powerful people do this kind of thing all the time. They launch products tied to hype, benefit massively, and retail investors are left holding the bag. Even public figures have launched coins that spiked and crashed. No one goes to prison. It's framed as business, marketing, timing. If they can do it, why am I uniquely evil? That's the mental gymnastics I've been doing for months. I paid off my parents' mortgage anonymously through a trust. I upgraded my life quietly. I invest conservatively now. Index funds, boring stuff. The irony. From the outside, I'm just a young guy who did well in crypto. Only I know how. Here's the real confession. I'm thinking about doing it again. Not with the same branding, not obviously connected. I've learned a lot since then. I could structure it better, spread wallets, use better narrative cycles, maybe even stretch it longer so it looks more organic before exit. That thought should horrify me. Instead, it feels like an opportunity. I've seen how the game works. Attention spikes, liquidity floods in, early insiders win, late buyers lose. That's the cycle. Every day, new tokens launch and implode. Some call it scams, others call it speculation. Where's the line? If I open a casino and someone loses their paycheck at blackjack, am I morally responsible? If I create a volatile asset and people ape in hoping for 100 times, am I obligated to protect them from their own risk tolerance? Or is that just capitalism? That's the question I can't answer, because here's the part I don't like admitting. I did mislead them. I implied there was long-term development. I hinted at things that didn't exist. I curated hope. It wasn't a neutral slot machine. It was theater. And I was directing it. Some nights I replay specific messages. There was a guy who said he'd been rugged before and finally felt like he found a real community. I remember responding with a heart emoji and we're building something special. That was a lie. Does the fact that it wasn't legally binding make it morally fine? I keep trying to reduce it to systems. The market rewards risk. Information asymmetry is everywhere. Early adopters always have an edge. But deep down, I know this wasn't just asymmetric information. It was intentional extraction. And yet, the world doesn't seem to punish this behavior. It often rewards it. The loudest, most shameless players make the most money. They rebrand. They launch again. They build followings. Part of me feels stupid for even hesitating. Another part of me wonders if this is the fork in the road moment. If I do it again, it won't be an experiment. It'll be a choice. A declaration of who I am. What messes with my head is that I don't feel like a monster. I'm not cruel in daily life. I'm decent to people. I help friends move. I call my mom. I donate occasionally. But I also orchestrated something that wiped out strangers' savings. The cognitive dissonance is wild. I've tried to imagine one of the people who lost money sitting in front of me. If they asked, "Why did you do it?" what would I say? I saw an opportunity. I needed to get ahead. I didn't technically break the law. None of those sound good out loud, and still, when I look at my bank balance, it's hard to regret it. That's the ugliest truth in this whole post. The money changed my life. It gave me options, security, freedom from the anxiety I grew up watching my parents carry every day. If I could go back and undo it, knowing I'd return to being broke, I honestly don't know if I would. That's why I'm here. I need outside perspective that isn't just crypto bros yelling based or legend. Is what I did fundamentally wrong? Or is it just an extreme version of what markets already are? Risk transferred from the late to the early. If I do it again, does that cement me as a scammer? Or am I just playing a game that everyone willingly steps into? Some of you will say, if you have to ask, you know the answer. Maybe. But I also know that morality often lags behind innovation. Entire industries operate in gray zones until regulation catches up. By the time society labels something wrong, the early players are already rich and untouchable. Am I overthinking this? Is the guilt just social conditioning? Or is it the last warning sign before I become someone I can't respect? I haven't launched anything new. Not yet. I've sketched ideas, watched trends. I know exactly what narrative would hit right now. It would probably work. And that's the problem. Because the only thing stopping me isn't fear of jail. It's a quiet voice asking whether I want to build my future on people who trusted a story I knew wasn't real. So Reddit, be honest with me. Is this just capitalism and good business, or am I dressing up exploitation in market language so I can sleep at night? I already know I can make the money. I just don't know what it will make me.
I set this down by lamplight with a trembling hand, not in the expectation that any man will believe me, but so that when my own senses fail entirely, there may remain some account of what we saw beyond the cross timbers in the autumn of 1880. My name is of no consequence. I was then serving as a ranger under a captain whose judgment I trusted, and I had with me my partner, Elijah Boone, as steady and competent a lawman as ever drew breath. We had been sent northward and westward after a fugitive by the name of Silas Gentry, a horse thief and murderer wanted for the shooting of a storekeeper outside Jacksboro. Gentry had crossed into the nation, where the broken country, the cedar breaks, and the old war trail swallow a man up as a creek swallows rainwater. For 5 days, Boone and I rode his sign through a land that seemed made for hiding sin. There were long reaches of yellow grass gone dry under the sun, belts of blackjack oak and post oak that shut out the light, and lonely gullies where the very air felt stale, as though no wind had stirred there since creation. Sometimes we found the ashes of Gentry's camp no older than one night. Once, a strip of blue shirt caught on a mesquite thorn. We reckoned we were close. On the evening of the 6th day, we came upon a place the Comanche scouts used to warn of, a shallow basin ringed with rock, with a stagnant pool in the center black as printer's ink. We had no desire to camp there, yet the horses were spent and the sky was already reddening down to the west. Boone looked over that hollow and said, "I don't like the feel of this ground." Neither did I. There are places in the frontier that trouble a man for no reason he can name. The birds go absent, the insects still themselves, and all at once you feel yourself an intruder where no Christian ought to stand. Even our horses rolled their eyes and snorted at the dark water. Still, we made camp a half-mile off in a stand of scrub oak. We ate cold bacon and hard bread and kept no fire. Near midnight, Boone woke me with one finger to my shoulder. He pointed toward the basin. I saw, between the trunks, 4 figures moving against the starlight. At first, I took them for Gentry and Confederates. Then I saw by their dress and bearing that they were Indians. 4 warriors, armed, riding slowly in a line abreast as if searching. Their ponies stepped oddly, with heads low and ears pinned flat. The riders did not speak. They made no signal I knew. Moonlight showed feathers hanging from one man's hair and beadwork on another's leggings, but everything looked dim and spoiled, as though seen through smoke. We lay quiet till they passed. Boone whispered that perhaps they had not scented us. Yet one of them turned his head toward our thicket and sat staring straight into the dark where we crouched. I say staring, though at that distance I ought not to have been able to make out his face. Even so, I knew with sudden certainty that he saw us plainly. Then he lifted one arm. The other 3 wheeled at once and came on. There was no time for parley. Boone fired first with his carbine, dropping the nearest pony in mid-stride. The beast screamed and pitched over, throwing its rider. I rose and fired my Colt at another. The reports crashed through the oaks and set the horses plunging at their tethers. The warriors answered with guns of their own, one with a Spencer, another with an old army revolver, and splinters jumped from the tree by my cheek. The fight scattered in the brush, confused and savage. Boone caught one through the shoulder, and I saw the man spin half round in the saddle. Another came on through the scrub straight at us, his mouth open in a snarl. I fired and missed. Boone shot him from 10 feet, and the bullet took him square in the chest, enough to knock him backward over his pony's rump. What followed was the first thing that turned my blood cold. The man lay still a moment in the dust. Then, in the same unhurried manner a drunkard might rise from sleep, he rolled to one knee and stood up again. Boone cursed and fired once more. I saw the ball strike him just left of the breastbone. I know a mortal hit when I see one. Any living man would have dropped stone dead. This one only staggered, then came forward again. He stepped into a shaft of moonlight between the trees. His eyes were white, not the whites showing around the iris as when a horse is frightened. I mean the whole of both eyes, blank and milk pale, with no pupil, no color, nothing human in them. From the corners of his mouth ran a black stream that, in the moonlight, I took for shadow. When he came nearer, I saw it was blood, thick upon his chin and spattered down the front of his shirt. Boone shouted, "Jesus preserve us!" The others showed themselves then, circling in the brush. All four had the same white eyes. All four bled from the mouth. One had a hole through his neck that bubbled darkly when he breathed, yet he made no sound. Another dragged a leg broken below the knee and still advanced at a steady pace, as if the ruined limb were no more hindrance than a twig caught in his moccasin. I emptied my revolver into the man before me. One ball struck his collarbone, one his belly, another, I know, went through the heart, for I saw the cloth kick inward at the center of his chest and blood burst from his back. He folded down, and I thought at last he was finished. He got up. I tell you true, he got up with that hole in him and walked on. Boone seized the Henry from his saddle boot and began firing as quick as a man shelling corn. The lever clacked in the dark, shots one upon another, until the basin below answered us with hollow echoes. Two of the warriors went down under that storm of lead. One rose immediately. The other crawled a few feet, then stood, swaying like a sapling in wind. There is a point where fear ceases to be an emotion and becomes a substance in the body, cold and heavy as lead. I felt it then. Every tale I had ever laughed at, every old Mexican story of the dead that wander, every Comanche warning of bad medicine and cursed grounds came back to me. The warrior with the shattered chest rushed Boone. My partner braced and fired from the hip. By providence or accident, the bullet struck square in the forehead. That one fell as though his strings had been cut. He did not rise again. Boone cried out, "The head! Shoot the head!" We backed together, firing deliberate now, not at center mass as any trained man would, but high, at the face and skull. One of them lurched in close enough for me to smell him. He carried a stink like opened graves after rain, sweet and rotten together. His lips had drawn back from his teeth. There was blood on them, but no breath came. I thrust my revolver almost against his temple and pulled the trigger. The top of his head broke apart. He dropped at my boots. Another sprang from the brush and caught Boone by the coat front before I could stop him. Boone drove his bowie knife under the thing's jaw to the hilt. It made no sign of pain. They wrestled like bears. I snatched up my rifle and fired into the warrior's ear so close the flash scorched Boone's hair. Both men went down. Boone rolled free, half strangled, and the other lay twitching in the leaves. The last of them had been the one with the broken leg. He stood a little apart, watching us with those white eyes. I cannot say how long. Then he put 2 fingers into the blood at his mouth and marked something upon his own breast. Whether it was a sign of his people or some devil's token, I do not know. He turned and limped toward the basin. Boone shouted for him to halt. He did not. Boone fired and missed in the dark. I fired once and saw his head snap forward. He pitched into the black water with scarce a splash. We waited for him to rise. He did not. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfight. No wind, no owl, no coyote, only our own gasping and the horses jerking at their lines. Boone sat with his hands over his face, and when he lowered them I saw he had blood on his neck, not his own, but that black, foul blood from the warrior that had seized him. We did not sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, we went to the bodies. 3 lay where we had shot them in the head. They were Indians, yes, but altered by something dreadful. Their skin had a gray cast under the copper, their tongues were swollen and dark, and the eyes, God help me, the eyes were still white even in death. Their wounds in the chest and belly were numerous enough to kill any 3 men twice over. Yet, save for the headshots, none appeared to have mattered. As for the basin, we found no body in it, only the black water, stagnant and smooth, and on the mud at its edge the track of 1 lame foot leading out toward the north. We never found Silas Gentry. Perhaps he saw what we saw and fled clean out of the territory. Perhaps those things had him already. Boone sickened within 3 days. He would not speak of that night except once, when his fever was highest. Then he gripped my wrist and whispered, "Don't let 'em bite through." He died before we reached Fort Richardson, so I write this for whoever chances upon it after me. I have worn the badge long enough to know the many forms evil may take in a man. But those were no men, though once they must have been. I shot one clean through the heart and saw him stand. I saw blood running from dead mouths and white eyes fixed on me without sight. I saw only head wounds put them down for good. What were they? I am a ranger, not a scholar, and I leave speculation to preachers and medicine men. Yet I ask it plain. Were they undead? Had some pestilence taken them and left only rage moving in their flesh? Or had we crossed into some cursed pocket of that old country where the dead do not know enough to lie still? Whatever the truth, I know this much. There are regions beyond the settlements where law does not ride, where even the Almighty seems far off, and where a man may meet something that no bullet was ever meant for. And if ever again I see white eyes in the dark, I shall not wait to ask questions.
I was 19 the first time I got on a plane alone, and I have been ruined for ordinary life ever since. That sounds dramatic, but I mean it in the best way. Some people find religion, some find love, some find a career that snaps everything into focus. I found departure boards. I found overnight buses, train platforms at dawn, border crossings with faded signs and bored guards. I found the feeling of stepping into a place where nobody knew my name, my history, or the version of me I had become back home. Since my late teens, travel has been the only thing that has ever felt completely real. I was never one of those people content to collect capitals like stamps and say, I had done a country because I saw the cathedral and took a photo of the skyline. I wanted side roads, old neighborhoods, river towns, places where people actually lived instead of places polished for visitors. I liked markets where nobody spoke English, guest houses with hard beds and unreliable fans, roadside stalls where you pointed at a pot and hoped for the best. I liked getting lost. More than that, I liked the kind of humility that comes with getting lost. Through my early 20s, I went everywhere I could afford, and some places I definitely could not. Eastern Europe in winter, remote villages in Peru, border regions in the Balkans, rusting port towns in West Africa, mountain roads in northern Vietnam, parts of the world where people back home would raise their eyebrows and ask, why there? Because those places still felt alive, I'd say. Because the edges of the map were always more interesting than the center. At some point, ordinary travel stopped being enough. I'm not proud of that. It sounds arrogant now, like I had developed a tolerance and needed a stronger dose. But that is more or less what happened. A few years ago, I got into what people call dark tourism, though I hated the term because it made it sound trendy, like buying a black hoodie and listening to podcasts. For me, it was never about posing in front of ruins or chasing some cheap thrill. It was about going to places that carried danger, history, or prohibition in the air, places that had a gravity to them, regions people warned you away from, places that still had a shadow over them. That mindset is what led me to the Golden Triangle. Even saying the name now still gives me a strange, hollow feeling. It has the kind of name that sounds mythical, until you get close enough to realize myths are usually built on very real suffering. The area, where Thailand meets Myanmar and Laos, had been fixed in my head for years. Misty hills, jungle roads, river crossings, old trafficking routes, militia territories, overlapping sovereignties, rumors layered on rumors. The kind of place where reality always seemed to slip a little out of focus. It might sound like the name of a TV game show, but in reality, the Golden Triangle is one of the few places on this planet where civilized law and order has not reached. It's the modern-day Wild West. Men make their own rules, and the one who holds the gun holds the power. It also happens to be the area where more than 70% of the global heroin trade originates, just to highlight what kind of people operate there. I flew into Bangkok first, and for a few days I let myself enjoy the familiar ritual of arrival. The city was bright and hot and overfull in the way great cities should be. Tuk-tuks snarled through traffic. Street food hissed in oil, rooftop bars pulsed with music. Tourists drifted around temples in linen and sunburn. Bangkok had that intoxicating quality some cities have where every hour feels like it could become a memory worth keeping. It was easy to pretend that this trip, like so many others, would end up as another set of stories, and photos, and private little discoveries. Then I went north. You can feel some places changing around you long before you understand them. That was what happened on the way toward the borderlands. The roads narrowed. The towns thinned out. The mood shifted from performance to watchfulness. In Bangkok, being a foreigner makes you visible in the easy, commercial way that tourist economies are built for. Up there, visibility felt different. Less like being welcomed, more like being noted. I stayed first in Chiang Rai, then kept moving. On paper, there were legitimate reasons to be there. History, geography, curiosity. The landscape itself was beautiful, in a severe, deceptive way. Green hills folding into one another, brown rivers moving slowly under low skies. villages that looked peaceful from a distance. But beauty in a place like that can unsettle you more than ugliness. It makes you forget, briefly, what lies under the surface. By then, I had started hearing the kind of warnings travelers like me are too good at translating into invitations. Don't go wandering too far. Don't ask too many questions. Don't hire random drivers. Don't cross where you shouldn't. Don't assume everyone who smiles is harmless. Every caution only sharpened the place in my imagination. I told myself I knew the difference between recklessness and curiosity. I told myself I had experience. I told myself I was careful. Those were the lies I packed alongside my clothes. It happened after sunset, on the second night out near the river. I had been drinking tea at a place that barely counted as a shop, more a shack with plastic chairs and a radio playing softly somewhere in the back. I remember the owner looking at me in a way I only understood later. Not friendly, not hostile. Just puzzled that I was still there after dark. I paid, stepped outside, and realized too late how empty the road had become. A pickup truck rolled up without urgency, which somehow made it worse. No screeching tires, no cinematic violence. Just a vehicle stopping where it should not have stopped. 3 men got out. One was smiling, one looked bored. The third looked like the only one there who might actually enjoy what came next. I knew immediately that running would be pointless. There are moments when your body understands before your mind does. One of them asked me something in Thai, then again in broken English. Tourist? Why here? Who with? I answered too quickly. That was a mistake. Fear makes you verbose, and verbosity sounds like invention. They searched me beside the road with the casual efficiency of people who had done similar things many times before. Passport, wallet, phone, camera. One of them looked through my photos and laughed softly when he reached the harmless ones, temples, markets, a river view at dusk. Another asked me if I was police, then army, then journalist. Every answer I gave felt thinner than the last. They put me in the truck. I will never forget that drive, not because of speed or violence, but because of how ordinary the world looked outside the window while my life was being reduced to its simplest terms. Trees, mud, the occasional light in the distance. A dog crossing the road. Inside the truck, nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. I had crossed some invisible threshold, and we all knew it. We stopped at a compound or camp or roadside property. I still could not tell you exactly what it was. Corrugated roofs, hanging bulbs, a muddy yard, men moving in and out of shadow. Not a dramatic fortress, something worse, a functioning place. A place with routines, a place where I was not the first problem brought in after dark. They sat me in a chair and questioned me again. Where was I from? Why had I come? Who had sent me? What was I looking for? I kept returning to the same desperate truth, which sounded absurd even to me. I was just a traveler, just a tourist, just an idiot with a backpack and too much confidence in the romance of dangerous places. At some point, one of them said a name I recognized from things I had read before the trip. The kind of name that exists half in headlines and half in rumor. Whether these men actually belonged to some powerful network, or were simply invoking it, I had no way of knowing. In that moment, it hardly mattered. What mattered was that they had the authority of men who believed nobody would come looking for me in time to help. Money changed the tone first. I gave them everything I had on me, then access to more. I paid because there was nothing else to do. They took it with the air of men deciding whether an insect was worth crushing or letting crawl away. For a while, I thought that might be enough. A stupid foreigner taxed for his stupidity. Then one of them said I could leave if I proved I understood whose ground I had stepped onto. He wanted loyalty, allegiance, a sign that I would remember, a mark. At first I thought he meant some sort of tattoo, and my mind flinched. I wish it was something so reversible. He looked me in the eyes, held up his hands. He was missing the ring fingers on both. In a sinister whisper, he said, "When you join the triad, you give them your life. No wife, no kids. Triad are your family. If you want us to do something for you, prove that you are family too." What I will say is that fear changes the borders of the self. Things you believe are impossible become negotiable when the alternative is death in a place where your name means nothing. I did what they demanded. I did it shaking so hard I thought I would black out. I did it while a part of my mind stood very far away and watched, disbelieving, as if this were happening to some other arrogant fool in some other story. Afterward, they let me go. Not immediately, not kindly, but eventually. A ride back towards somewhere lit. A final warning I did not need translated. My possessions reduced, my certainty annihilated. By the time I reached a proper clinic, and then, later, a larger hospital, the whole thing already felt unreal, like something my brain had stretched and distorted to make sense of it. People always imagine that surviving something like that gives you clarity. It doesn't. It gives you fragments, smells, tones of voice, the color of a bulb over wet ground, the look of men who see fear every day and no longer find it remarkable. I came home with scars, the physical ones I can rationalize away. It's the mental scars that haunt my sleep. My explanations grow cleaner every time I tell them. Accident, theft, bad situation while traveling, a version suitable for friends, another for family, another for strangers. I learned quickly that most people do not want the full truth anyway. It unsettles them too much. They prefer lessons neatly packaged. They want danger to make sense. I do wonder sometimes if I ever meet my future wife on my wedding day, when the ceremony reaches the "with this ring" section, and we look down at where my finger used to be. What do I say then? Do I turn to everyone and say, "Sorry folks, my ring finger is buried in the mud somewhere in Laos or Thailand or God knows"? So here is the neat version. Since age has made me less romantic and more honest, there are parts of the world that are beautiful, fascinating, and absolutely not meant for your curiosity. There are places where your desire for authenticity means nothing, where your passport means less than you think, where your confidence is mistaken for stupidity, because, in truth, that is exactly what it is. Not every warning is a challenge. Not every forbidden place contains wisdom. Sometimes it contains men with power, rules you do not understand, and consequences that last the rest of your life. I still travel. I probably always will. But I no longer believe the world owes me access just because I want to see what is hidden. Some places are hidden for a reason. And sometimes, when they say don't visit, you should listen.
All right. So this is one of those stories that sounds fake the second you hear it. If you're anything like me, you'll probably spend most of it trying to come up with a rational explanation. I did that too. I still try to. But I'm going to tell it exactly how it happened. Back when I was 22, I was a film student, final year, trying way too hard to make something different, so I didn't just blend in with everyone else making documentaries about cafes and local artists. I wanted something atmospheric, something unsettling, so I picked an abandoned asylum. There was one near where I lived, huge place, shut down years before I was even born. Everyone in the area knew it. It had a reputation. People said it was haunted, obviously. Patients still wandering the halls, lights flickering, voices at night. The usual stuff. I didn't believe any of that. At the time, I thought ghost stories were just people trying to make old buildings interesting. So my idea wasn't to prove it was haunted, it was to prove the opposite. I wanted to show how easy it is for people to scare themselves. That was the plan. I went at night, not because I believed anything, but because I didn't want to get caught. The place was private property, fenced off, technically illegal to enter, but I'd read online there were ways in. I parked about half a mile away, grabbed my gear, camera, tripod, audio kit, lights, and walked the rest through this overgrown stretch of land. And I remember this clearly. The closer I got, the quieter it felt, like the normal background noise of everything, cars, wind, whatever, just kind of dropped off. You don't notice silence until it's wrong. The building itself was massive. 4 stories, long wings stretching out on either side, rows of black windows staring out into the dark. Some were smashed, some boarded, but most just looked empty. I found the side entrance I'd read about. Old door, metal reinforced, looked like it had been forced open before. I set my stuff down, reached for the handle, and it opened. From the inside, I actually jumped back. There was a man standing there. He looked normal. That's the weird part. Not creepy, not threatening, just out of place. Late 40s maybe, neat hair, clean. He was dressed in a brown button-up shirt, brown tie, brown slacks, black shoes. Like, oddly formal for a security guard at an abandoned building. He looked straight at me, then at my equipment, and said, "You're here to film." Not asked, said. I immediately thought, that's it, I'm done. I started apologizing, saying I didn't realize anyone was there, I could leave. But instead, he just stepped aside. "You may as well come in," he said. And yeah, I know how that sounds. Every horror movie ever starts with someone making a stupid decision like that. But at the time, I was relieved. I thought I'd gotten lucky. Instead of being thrown out, I had someone who knew the place showing me around. So I went in. The air inside was different. Colder, yeah, but also heavy. Still. Like the building wasn't just empty, it was sealed somehow. He started walking ahead of me, slow, steady pace, like he'd done it 1,000 times. And as we went, he started talking. This was receiving, he said, pointing to the entrance hall. Patients were processed here. We moved through different rooms, old wards, treatment areas, recreation halls, and he knew everything. Not vague stuff, details, dates, functions, how rooms were used, what kinds of patients were kept where. I started filming, asking him questions. He answered all of them. Looking back, that's one of the things that bothers me most. He didn't hesitate once. The way he spoke was off. Not obviously, not in a way you'd pick up straight away. But the longer I listened, the more it stood out. He used words people don't really use anymore. Residents instead of patients. Disturbances. Melancholia. It sounded old, like he wasn't just describing the place, like he belonged to it. At one point I asked about the head doctor. You know, the one from the stories. Every abandoned asylum has one. The second I mentioned that, he changed. Just slightly. People talk too much, he said. That was it. No story. No explanation. Just that. He took me upstairs after that. And that's when things started to feel wrong. The second floor was tighter, narrower, like the walls were closer together than they should be. My light kept catching dust in the air and it looked thicker up there, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. We walked down this long corridor, doors on both sides, and stopped outside a set of double doors. This, he said, was the head doctor's office. I lifted my camera. Can we go in? And for the first time he snapped. No. Not loud, but sharp. There was something in his voice that just shut me down immediately. No one goes in there, he said. And the way he looked at me when he said it, I can't really explain it. But it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a rule. A second later, he was calm again, like nothing had happened. Come, he said. I'll show you where the worst patients were kept. And this is where everything goes sideways. We'd barely started moving again when there was this massive crash from downstairs, like a door being kicked in. Then shouting, "Police, stay where you are." Flashlights flooded the corridor. 4 officers came up fast, shouting, boots hitting the floor hard. One grabbed me straight away, pulled me off balance. I tried to explain, but they weren't listening. "I'm with security," I kept saying. "He let me in, he's right." I turned to point. He was gone. Just gone. No footsteps. No door closing. No movement. The hallway behind us was empty. They dragged me downstairs anyway. I didn't resist. I had too much gear on me to even try. Outside, they finally let go. There was a sergeant waiting by one of the cars, older guy, calm, the kind of person who doesn't need to raise his voice to be taken seriously. He looked at me, looked at my equipment, and asked, "Student?" I nodded, explained everything, told him I wasn't damaging anything, I had permission, security let me in. He didn't react. He opened the door, I said. Brown shirt, tie, he was showing me around. He's inside right now. The sergeant just looked at me, then he said, "There is no security." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I thought he was joking. I was just with him. "No," he said. "There are motion sensors. When they trip, we get called." That was it. I tried again, told him everything. The tour, the rooms, the office he told me not to enter. When I mentioned that, something shifted. The sergeant picked up his radio and said, 10 to 55. It happened again. Again. I remember asking what that meant. He didn't answer directly. He just looked at me and said very clearly, "Leave. Now. Do not come back." And I did. But before I turned away, I looked back at the building. Second floor, rear wing, There was a figure standing in one of the windows, perfectly still, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I never went back. I never finished the documentary, and when I checked the footage later, everything I filmed inside was there. Every corridor, every room, my voice asking questions. But there's no sign of him, not once. No footsteps, no answers, no reflection, nothing. So, yeah, I went there to prove people were just scaring themselves, to show that there was nothing in that building. But someone let me in that night, walked me through it, knew everything about it. And the police had heard that story before, so I'll leave you with this. If there's no security at that place, then who opens the door?
The Megiddo Protocol. I have not written this down before. For 10 years I told myself that if I never put it on paper, it would remain what I've tried to believe it was. A trick of static, a momentary lapse in signal, an overactive imagination, fueled by too many late-night conspiracy specials on cable. But it wasn't just noise. It was structured, intentional, and it knew something I didn't.
It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 1995. I was 21, driving my rusted-out '88 Ford Taurus home from college. I can't remember what state I was in anymore. Somewhere in the Midwest. Illinois, Indiana, southern Michigan. The back roads blur together now in memory. Long black ribbons cutting through fields that seemed to stretch to the horizon and beyond.
I always took the back roads. My friends thought I was insane for adding an extra 2 hours to the trip, but I liked it. I called it Rural Forgotten America. Grain silos like sentinels. Abandoned barns caved in on themselves. Gas stations that looked like they hadn't seen a customer since Carter was president. There was a kind of peace to it. A stillness you don't get on the interstate with its 18-wheelers and fluorescent rest stops. The sky that afternoon was low and iron gray. November cold without snow. Fields shaved down to stubble. Every few miles, a farmhouse with a single window, lit in the fading day. I had the radio on, tuned to a local rock station that bled in and out of range, depending on the hills. They were playing In Bloom by Nirvana, Kurt's voice distant and distorted in that familiar, comforting way, the kind of song that makes the emptiness feel cinematic instead of lonely. My gas tank was half full. I remember that clearly. Then the signal died. Not faded. Died. 1 second, guitars and drums. The next, pure white static. Loud enough that I instinctively reached to turn the volume knob down. I figured I'd dropped into a dead zone. It happens sometimes out there. I tapped the tuner, adjusted the antenna, smacked the side of the dash like that ever did anything. That's when the beeping started. A shrill tone, high, almost surgical, 10 seconds long, then silence. Another 10-second tone. 6 of them. Exactly 6. Not 5, not 7. I counted. I remember staring at the digital clock on the dash, watching the seconds tick by in green LED numbers. 4:17 p.m., 4:18 p.m. 6 identical tones, each separated by perhaps 2 seconds of silence. They weren't musical. They weren't accidental feedback. They were deliberate, like something calibrated. After the 6th tone, there was static again. Thicker now, layered. Under it, I thought I heard something like wind. Then a voice, male, flat, controlled. The kind of voice that has practiced sounding calm in a bunker. Foxtrot, Echo, Alpha, Romeo. Designation: active. Protocol Megiddo. Repeat, Megiddo. Stand by. The signal crackled, as if the words were being dragged across gravel. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went pale. Foxtrot, Echo, Alpha, Romeo, fear. I don't know why that struck me immediately, but it did. I was a political science minor. I knew NATO phonetic alphabet from some late-night trivia session in a dorm. My brain latched onto it like a drowning man grabs driftwood. Protocol Megiddo. Not Megiddo. He pronounced it Megiddo. Hard G, clipped. The voice didn't sound panicked. It sounded procedural. Then silence. For about a minute, there was nothing but static. I could hear my own breathing in the car, too loud in the enclosed space. The road ahead was empty. No headlights, no farmhouses in sight. Just telephone poles marching alongside the road. I thought, emergency broadcast test. Some weird regional glitch. Then another voice came through. Older, familiar. If you grew up in the 80s, you know it. That cadence. That warmth with steel underneath. It was the voice of Ronald Reagan. My fellow Americans. My stomach dropped. Even in 1995, that voice was unmistakable. He went on, steady and grave. The Soviet Union has launched its entire nuclear arsenal at the United States. Our defense systems have engaged, but the outcome is uncertain. To those Americans who survive the coming hours, I ask you, aid one another. Stand firm. Defend your communities from any oppressors. The spirit of liberty endures beyond any attack. I don't remember the exact wording beyond that. I remember the implication. Entire nuclear arsenal. Launched. I looked up at the sky instinctively, as if I might see contrails arcing across the clouds. My first thought wasn't geopolitical. It was small and selfish and immediate. Mom and Dad. They were expecting me tomorrow. Mom would be prepping the turkey already. I pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder so abruptly that dust kicked up around the headlights. The engine idled roughly. I could feel the vibration through the seat. Reagan wasn't president anymore. That thought kept hammering in my skull. It was 1995. Bill Clinton was president. The Soviet Union didn't even exist anymore. It had dissolved 4 years earlier. So what the hell was this? Was this an old recording? Some leftover Cold War contingency message? But why now? The voice continued for perhaps 30 seconds more, urging unity, resistance, faith. There was no panic in it, no chaos, just inevitability. Then, click. Static vanished, and without warning, guitars flooded back in. He's the one who likes all our pretty songs. The last 30 seconds of In Bloom by Nirvana roared through the speakers as if nothing had happened. I jerked upright in my seat. The signal was crystal clear. No distortion, no static. The song ended. There was a half-second pause. Then the DJ, laughing. Sorry to anyone out there that missed that absolute cherry hit by the boys from Seattle. Seems our signal went haywire for a few of you. Don't know what that was, but we're back now. Stay tuned. His tone was light, amused, haywire. That was it. No apology for emergency broadcast interference. No mention of nuclear war. No mention of presidential voices from a bygone administration. Just another spin of a grunge anthem and a traffic update. I sat there for a full minute after that, engine running, hands trembling. I scanned the horizon again. The fields were still. The sky still gray. No sirens. No distant thunder. No mushroom clouds. Finally, I told myself it had to be a prank. Pirate radio. Someone hijacking the frequency. The 90s were weird like that. I merged back onto the road, but something had shifted. The silence outside felt thicker. The farmhouses I passed seemed more isolated. At one intersection, I thought I saw someone standing near a mailbox, just watching the road. But when I blinked, there was no one there. The rest of the drive passed without incident. When I got home, everything was normal. My mother hugged me. My father asked about classes. We watched football. There was no breaking news, no emergency alerts, no sky-splitting light. That night, after everyone went to bed, I turned on the TV and flipped through channels. Nothing. The world was intact. I tried to find information in the following weeks. I called the radio station from my dorm room payphone. I asked if they'd had any technical issues the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The receptionist sounded confused. "Not that I know of," she said. "We don't get many complaints." I asked if they ever ran emergency broadcast tests that included older presidential recordings. She laughed softly. "No, that would be weird." I didn't tell her why I was asking. I checked newspapers in the library archives for any mention of signal interference across the Midwest. Nothing. I even asked a professor about Cold War fail-safes, whether there were pre-recorded presidential messages that could accidentally trigger. He said there had been contingency recordings in the 60s and 70s, but systems were modernized constantly. And besides, he added, those wouldn't override local FM rock stations in the middle of nowhere, unless the entire system had been engaged. Protocol Megiddo. The phrase haunted me. Megiddo is a place in Israel. I knew that from a comparative religion class, associated with Armageddon, the final battle. But why pronounce it wrong? Why spell it wrong in my head? Years passed. I graduated, moved cities, bought a different car. I never heard anything like it again. But sometimes, driving through rural stretches at dusk, when the radio drifts between stations and static creeps in like distant surf, I find myself waiting for the tones. 10 seconds. 6 of them. I did something last year I've never told anyone. I drove back, not to the exact road. I couldn't find it. The Midwest is endless grids, and memory is unreliable. But I spent a weekend wandering 2-lane highways between cornfields, trying to recreate the conditions. Late November, gray sky, grunge on the radio. I parked on a shoulder somewhere in what might have been Indiana. Turned the volume up, waited. Nothing happened. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky took on that peculiar bruised purple color, and for just a second, just a fraction, I felt the same prickle along my spine I'd felt in 1995. Like I was listening to something not meant for me. I've tried to rationalize it in every way possible. Radio bleed from a military frequency, a prank transmission, a hallucination brought on by monotony and long hours on empty roads. But hallucinations don't synchronize with song endings. They don't cut cleanly back to programmed music. And they don't leave you with a phrase that refuses to fade. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the voice saying, to those Americans who survive the coming hours, survive, not prevent, not endure. Survive. What if it wasn't meant for 1995? What if something, some automated system buried in Cold War infrastructure, briefly activated? A test of a contingency that was never supposed to fire? Or worse, what if it did fire? And for a moment, I heard a broadcast from a version of this country that didn't make it. The logical part of me dismisses that immediately. But the other part remembers how real it sounded. How official, how final. I sometimes wonder if anyone else heard it. If, somewhere out there, another 21-year-old on a lonely stretch of back road pulled over and stared at the sky, waiting for light that never came. If they, too, tried to call a station and were told nothing unusual had happened. If they, too, still hear those tones in their dreams. 6 of them. Exactly 10 seconds each, and sometimes, when the house is quiet and I can't sleep, I turn on the radio and tune between stations until I find pure static. I turn the volume up, and I wait for a voice to come through and say, Foxtrot, Echo, Alpha, Romeo, designation active, protocol Megiddo, stand by. Because a small, terrible part of me believes it wasn't a glitch. It was a rehearsal. And one day, the beeps will come again. Only next time. There won't be any music afterward. It's October 12th, and I'm 49 years and 364 days old. Tomorrow, I turn 50. Half a century. That's what they call it when they want it to sound dignified. Milestone. Golden. A blessing. What they don't tell you is that the closer you get to 50, the more the past starts pulling up a chair at your kitchen table. Tonight it's 1996 sitting across from me. It was the summer Freddie Francis Gambiani and I went to Sicily to find ourselves. That's what we told our mothers anyway. Truth was, we were 2 Italian-American kids from Staten Island who grew up on gangster movies and Sunday gravy, convinced we were heirs to something bigger than ourselves. We weren't looking to find ourselves. We were looking to confirm the myth. Freddie was the handsome one. Thick black hair, that easy grin. The kind of confidence that made women lean in closer without realizing they were doing it. Me? I was the narrator of our little movie. Freddie was the star. We fancied ourselves ladies' men, wannabe wise guys. We said things like respect and honor, like we understood the weight of them. Sicily taught us the difference between saying a word and carrying it. We were in a small coastal town. I won't name it. I still won't. The bar was dim, all wood smoke and espresso cups. Old men at the walls, young ones pretending not to watch. That's where Freddie met her. She had dark eyes that didn't blink enough. The kind of beauty that looks carved out of something older than time. She laughed at his bad Italian, touched his arm. That was all it took. He looked at me like he'd won something. We left him there that night. He came back at sunrise, shirt wrinkled, smiling like a king. You see that? He said. This is the old country, baby. By noon we knew. Her fiancé wasn't just some jealous boyfriend. He was a captain. Not the kind from Staten Island social clubs who argue about garbage routes and union jobs, a real one. The kind whose name people don't say above a whisper. The kind whose uncles and cousins fill entire cemeteries. We told ourselves it would be fine. Back home, if lines got crossed, there were conversations. Maybe a punch thrown. Maybe some money exchanged. Pride bruised, but patched up over wine and cold cuts. That's exactly what happened at first. The fiancé found us that afternoon. There was shouting. Freddie swung first. Chairs hit the ground. I remember blood. I don't remember whose. And then it stopped. Money changed hands. Apologies were offered. Wine appeared like magic. Someone brought out gabagool, as if cured meat could cure insult. We laughed. They laughed. We thought it was over. That was our mistake. That night they came to our hotel. No shouting this time. No chairs scraping the floor. Just quiet, deliberate knocking. There were 4 of them. Maybe 5. They were polite. That's what I remember most. Polite. They drove us out, past the town, past the street lights, up into the hills, where the sea looked black and endless below the cliffs. There was a house. Stone. No neighbors. Inside, the air smelled like dust and something metallic. They separated us at first. Then they brought her in. The girl from the bar. Except she wasn't the girl from the bar anymore. Her face was swollen, lips split, one eye closing. She was shaking so badly I thought she'd collapse. They stood her in front of us. No one raised their voice. One of the men said something softly in Italian. I didn't catch it all, but I heard the word familia. Family. She lifted her hand, and she pointed at Freddie. Freddie started to talk, to joke, to explain. That grin, the one that worked everywhere else, flickered and died on his face. They dragged him out of the room. I can still hear his shoes scraping the floor. I never saw him again. They let me go before dawn. No explanation, no threats, just a ride back to town. One of them leaned close before I got out of the car. Forget, he said, in careful English. That was it. Forget. The next day, they found Freddie and the girl at the bottom of the cliffs. Official report said accident. Maybe suicide. Lovers' despair. Small towns are good at closing books quickly. I didn't argue. I didn't stay for the funeral they held for her. I packed my bag. At the hotel desk, the clerk handed me an envelope. No return address. My name, written neatly across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "Remember the family live in America too. You don't talk about us. We don't talk about you. Enjoy your life." And then my full name. First, middle, last. Not a nickname. Not the shortened Ellis Island version. The one only paperwork and government forms use. For 30 years, I did exactly what they told me. I forgot, or I pretended to. I got married, had kids, started a business, paid taxes, mowed my lawn. I became aggressively ordinary. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of a dark sedan parked too long across the street. A stranger at a wedding asking too many questions about where I'd traveled in my youth. Probably nothing. Probably. But tomorrow I turn 50. And I keep thinking about honor. We thought we understood it because we grew up adjacent to the myth. Because our grandfathers came from the same island. Because we ate the same food and said the same words. But over there, honor wasn't theater. It wasn't something you toasted with wine. It was currency, and we overdrew the account. I've kept quiet for 3 decades. I never told Freddie's mother the truth. She went to her grave believing it was an accident. I let her. I told myself silence was survival. But here's the thing about turning 50. You start wondering if survival was worth the cost. I don't know why I'm writing this now. Maybe because if something happens, if a car follows too long, if an old debt decides to collect interest, at least there will be a record somewhere. Or maybe I just want someone, anyone, to know that Freddie Francis Gambiani didn't fall. He was taken. And somewhere out there, men who value reputation more than life are still keeping score. If you're reading this and you're from back home, from either home, understand something. I kept my end of the bargain for 30 years, but I'm tired of pretending I don't remember. My brother was killed because of a Netflix show. That is the ugliest, stupidest sentence I have ever written, and every time I say it out loud, people think I am joking, or trying to be dramatic, or looking for somebody easy to blame. I wish that was all it was. I wish I was the kind of man who needed a villain simple enough to fit into one sentence. The truth is uglier than that. It is smaller, pettier, and somehow even more cruel. My brother died because a stupid man watched Breaking Bad and came away from it thinking Walter White was not a warning, but a business plan. His name was Daniel. He was my older brother by 6 years, and for most of my life, he was the person I measured other men against. Not because he was perfect. He was not. He could be arrogant, impatient, and had a talent for choosing the worst possible moment to make a joke. But when we were kids, he was the one who made every place feel survivable. If our dad was in one of his moods, Dan could make me laugh, with a face pulled behind his back. If I got cornered by bigger boys at school, Dan seemed to appear from nowhere. He had that way about him. He carried himself like somebody who could take a hit and stay standing. And when you are younger than that kind of person, you think they must be indestructible. Maybe he thought so too. He met a woman called Leah when he was 27, and for a while, I thought that was it for him. That was the making of him. She was good for him. She steadied him. They rented a flat together, got a dog, talked about holidays in places neither of them could really afford yet. He stopped drifting from job to job. He started planning. Not dreaming, planning. There is a difference. Dreams are easy. Plans ask something from you. Then, like it so often does, it all came apart slowly and then all at once. I never got the full story of why they split. I heard his version, and I heard hers once, years later by accident, when I bumped into her in a supermarket and she looked at me with this old guilty sadness that told me she still carried some piece of it. From what I gathered, it was not one thing. It was money. It was his temper. It was her being tired of making excuses for him. It was him feeling judged every time she tried to help. It was the sort of ending that starts long before anybody says the words. When Leah left, something in Dan gave way. Not dramatically at first. It was not smashing windows and screaming in the street. It was quieter than that. He stopped answering calls, stopped shaving, started drinking hard, lost his job, borrowed money and never paid it back. He made stupid friends because stupid friends ask less of you. One bad night turned into another, and then into a version of his life where every bad decision made the next one easier. The actual charge that sent him to prison was burglary. He and 2 others broke into a warehouse thinking there were electronics stored there. There were not. The place had been mostly emptied, and a security guard caught them inside. Nobody was hurt, thank God, but there were tools found in their car, and one of the other men was carrying a knife. Dan swore he did not know about that. Maybe he was telling the truth. By then it hardly mattered. He had the record, the drink, the wrong company, the look of a man already halfway condemned in the eyes of the court. He did a few years. Visiting him was one of the strangest experiences of my life because prison did not seem to make him harder in the way I expected. If anything, it ground him down first, and then, in the last year, sharpened him into someone quieter and more honest. He started reading. He joined every course they offered. Anger management, addiction support, job readiness, whatever they had. The first year inside, he was furious with the world. The second year, he was mostly furious with himself. By the end, he had become almost careful. That was the word I kept coming back to. Careful. He told me once, through the plastic chair scrape and the vending machine hum in the visitors' hall. I think this is the first time in my life I've had to sit in a room and be exactly who I am. No excuses. No running off, no girlfriend to fix it, no pub, no gear, no pretending. Just me. And I'm not saying I like the bastard, but at least I know him now. That was my brother when he came out. Not fixed, because people are not washing machines, but clearer. Softer in some places, harder in better ones. He knew he had made a ruin of things, and for the first time, he seemed willing to build from the rubble instead of curse it. Part of his release conditions meant he had to spend 12 months in a halfway house. It was an old converted place on the edge of town, a broad Victorian building that had once probably belonged to a family with servants and money and now smelled of boiled vegetables, detergent, and old heating pipes. There were 8 residents in total, men at different stages of release, all trying in theory to find work, stay clean, obey curfews, and convince the system they could be trusted not to slide straight back into the holes they had come out of. Dan hated the loss of privacy, but accepted it. It's a year, he told me. I can do a year standing on my head. He got a part-time job washing dishes at a hotel. He was saving. He talked about maybe doing some training in plumbing once the year was up. He sounded tired, but hopeful, and hope on him looked fragile, like something newly healed. Then there was the man in the room next door. I only met him once. His name was Curtis. He had a twitchy, bright-eyed intensity about him, like he was always half a sentence ahead of himself. He was younger than Dan, maybe late 20s, in for petty drug offenses. Possession, dealing, that sort of thing. He had not come out of prison humbled. He had come out offended. The world, according to Curtis, had constantly failed to recognize his potential. Every setback was somebody else's fault. Every consequence was bad luck. He talked a lot about the game and real money in a way that made me tired within minutes. Dan called him a moron, but not with real hatred, more with the exhausted contempt of a man forced to share a landing with a bad smell. Apparently Curtis had become obsessed with Breaking Bad inside. He had watched it over and over, according to Dan, like it was scripture. Only he seemed to have watched a completely different show from everybody else, because what he took from it was not the rot, or the ego, or the destruction. He took from it this lunatic fantasy that chemistry plus courage equaled wealth, that there were fortunes waiting for any man bold enough to ignore the rules. He talked about meth, the way idiots talk about cryptocurrency or day trading or any other thing they think will lift them instantly out of ordinary life. Not as work, not as poison, as a shortcut, Dan told me once, laughing in disbelief. He genuinely thinks the reason nobody's done it round here is because everybody else is too thick to see the opportunity. I said he should tell staff. He shrugged. Tell them what? That he talks shit? Half the house talks shit. He's all mouth. I think about that a lot. That sentence, he's all mouth. People always think the signs before a disaster will arrange themselves neatly in hindsight, bright and obvious. They do not. Most of the time, they look exactly like the 100 stupid things people do without consequence every day. What I know of the final night came from the inquest, from newspapers, from the statements of 2 survivors, and from the details I wish I could scrub out of my head. Curtis had been ordering chemicals off the dark web for weeks. Not the proper stuff, not lab grade, not anything remotely controlled or safe. Mystery solvents, fertilizer derivatives, stripped-down compounds sold by anonymous accounts to buyers too greedy or too ignorant to care. He had smuggled pieces of equipment in bit by bit. Glassware, tubing, heating plates. He kept it hidden in bags under his bed and in the wardrobe, in a halfway house, in a building full of men sleeping 3 feet from each other, in a building with old pipes and a gas line that, according to the report, should have been replaced years before. Late that night, after curfew, he decided to cook a batch in his room. Maybe he thought everyone else was asleep. Maybe he thought he was a genius. Maybe he was high. I do not know. No one living could tell us. And I am not sure I would trust the answer anyway. One of the survivors said there was a smell first. Not smoke. Something sharp and artificial, like bleach mixed with petrol. Another resident banged on Curtis's door and told him to knock it off with whatever he was doing. Curtis shouted back something about minding his own business. A few minutes later, there was a flash under the doorframe, bright enough to turn the corridor white. The first explosion came from the room itself. A bad chemical reaction, rapid heat, pressure, shattered glass. That was enough to throw Curtis into the opposite wall and blast the door off its hinges. But that was not what killed most of them. The blast ignited the gas. When the line went, the house did not so much burn as open. That is how the fire investigator described it in one article I could never stop rereading. The structure experienced catastrophic internal overpressure. Such clean, dead words for what they mean. Flame moving through walls, floors lifting, windows becoming knives, men dragged from sleep into fire before they even understood they were dying. 8 people died. My brother was one of them. Sometimes I imagine his last moments, and sometimes I try with everything I have not to. Did he wake to the smell? Did he hear the first blast and sit up? Did he have time to stand? To think not again? Not after all this? Or was it mercifully fast? The kind of violence that erases thought before fear can fully arrive. I hope for the second. I fear the first. The papers loved the story for a week. There was something in it that pleased them. The irony, the stupidity, the little moral package of it all. Ex-con in halfway house killed by amateur meth cook, inspired by television drama. Easy headline, easy disgust, easy laughter. If you were rotten enough. What those stories did not capture was this. My brother had done the hard part. He had already gone into the dark and turned back. He had paid for what he did. He had come out determined to live smaller, straighter, quieter. He was not chasing glamour. He was washing dishes, attending meetings, saving notes in a jar, trying to become the sort of man who could one day be boring in peace. He died because he happened to be sleeping on the other side of a wall from a fool who thought fiction was instruction. So yes, my brother was killed because of a Netflix show. Not really, not literally, not in the way lawyers or clever people would allow. He was killed by chemicals, by negligence, by a crumbling house, by a criminal idiot with a God complex and no sense. But I still come back to that first ugly sentence because it captures the madness of it. That this huge, singular life, this man I loved and lost and still miss in stupid little daily ways, was ended by somebody too thick to understand the difference between tragedy and aspiration. That is the part I cannot forgive. Not that Curtis was evil, though maybe he was. Not that the system housed vulnerable men in a place that could go up like tinder. Not even that luck was cruel, because luck always is. It is that my brother finally learned how to live and died because the man next door learned absolutely nothing at all.